Nehruvian government, Nehru's government quotes Vishnu Purana to ascertain the borders of India. So this is something again Eknath Ranade, the founder of Vivekananda Kendra, said that irrespective of political ideology, inside Hindutva is there. So to discover that Hindutva as a national process, whether he is even a Marxist, Hindutva is there, deep inside. We have to go and take it out. This book is that attempt.
Okay, in that sense, sir, it looks, for me, it looks like you try to explore, or you try to work around the what we call as the media narrative that was built on the matters of the Hindutva, which is largely a political debate, rather than taking it to the root cause of social or the core ideas of the very, as you mentioned, the process, the way of life. And even the Supreme Court described it as Hindu's way of life. So, like, probably somehow you try to restrict yourself only to the political discourse that what's happening currently in the media?
No, I haven't limited myself to the discourse, political discourse. Okay, because as I understand, Hindu Rashtra is an existential reality. It is not a political goal. It is not a political goal to be achieved. It is an existential reality that has to be realized by each and every person. So this book is an attempt to do that. Okay. Hence you have a chapter on science, for example. What is the Hindutva contribution to science? And there is a chapter on what is the Hindutva contribution to the social emancipation of the people. This is not political at all. For example, you think of women's emancipation. Always these labels, patriarchal, Brahminical hegemony is attached to Hindutva. But look at history. Okay. For any nation to develop, for women emancipation, you need to raise the marriage age. You need to stop the child marriage. And once child marriage was rampant, not only in India, it was a universal phenomenon. It was there in England also. Almost at the same time when the Child Marriage Prevention Act came here, it also was implemented there. And for your information, in the canonical laws of the Catholic Church, child marriage was very much there, even till very recent times. Okay. So, who were the people who fought against child marriage in India? The person who was instrumental in bringing that law, and you know the name of the law, Sharda Act. Who brought this Sharda Act? Harbilas Sharda. What is the political orientation of Harbilas Sharda? He was a strong Hindutvaite. He wrote the book, This Supremacy of Hindu Civilization, and he envisioned a Hindu-Buddhist coalition across the nations to fight against or to stand as a resistance wall against the monotheistic or monopolistic expansionism. So, this book does not limit itself to the political discourse. It looks at the entire processes, all the nation building processes, and sees how Hindutva is an inalienable, integral part of this nation building process of India.
Well, it is a very two interesting point that you have mentioned now. That one is the idea of the nation building, and another one is in the process of the Hindutva process or Hindutva way of life. So if you compare in these two, and as you discuss, describe more of these things in the post-2014 era, so do you really think that Hindutva still can be considered as a way of life rather than mere political identity?
See, Hindutva is the basis of India's nationhood. We have to understand this. You take Hindutva away, then India does not exist. It is just an infrastructural network. Beyond that, it is nothing. Hindutva is the basis. So what is Hindutva? Hindutva is theodiversity. Theodiversity was the term that was coined by Professor Logesh Chandra, who was a professor of Buddhist studies. He told that this theodiversity is the basis of Hindutva. Ekam Sadvipra Bhakta Vatanti. And every time there has been a threat to this theodiversity, India as a nation has come together and offered resistance, like in the form of Guru Tej Bahadur's Balidan, like in the form of Vidyaranya, inspiring Hakka-Bukka, Harihara and Bukka to build this Vijayanagara empire, okay? And then during, through Shivaji, and then through independence movement. the basis of all this is the preservation and nurturing of theodiversity. And this is the basis of India's nation building. Whatever we are building to strengthen this. In post 2014, though there has been a lot of talks about Hindutva being a political ideology and all that, if you look at it, the breakneck speed with which the infrastructure is getting built in India, it is because of Hindutva. It was Swayamsevak, Vajpayee, who envisioned the roads physically connecting all the villages to the nation, right? And it was now Narendra Modi who is looking at the entire thing. And for example, he launched something called a satellite that was connecting all the SAARC nations. And I have mentioned it here. From where does the vision come of uniting all these people that belongs to the larger landmass of India called the Akhanda Bharat? It comes from Hindutva, okay? And reducing corruption by direct bank transfers, where does this come from? It comes from Hindutva. If this nation is corrupt, now we have to remember this very clearly, if this nation is corrupt, then that corruption is pinned upon India's civilization. It is shown as a civilizational deficiency. Indians are basically corrupt. We always used to say this, right? Even in ordinary conversation, we Indians are corrupt. How that particular thought was injected into us? Because the British narrative was that we are idol worshippers, and because we are idol worshippers, we are inherently corrupt, and that corruption is showing itself in our social life, and that is why Indians are corrupt. When Narendra Modi shows clearly that with a strong integral approach, you can reduce corruption in the society, then he shows that India is not inherently corrupt. That is Hindutva. So, we have to see Hindutva in this light and in this framework. That is what this book talks about. It is not the political discourse, it is beyond the political discourse, into the heart of things.
Okay. Very interesting point that recently many people are started making this comment that I may be a Hindu, but I don't follow Hindutva. So how do you agree or disagree?
Well, there is this famous Buddhist story about Siddhartha saving Hamsa, right? So when Hamsa was wounded, when the swan was wounded by Devadatta, and I don't know why that name is there, Devadatta, it may be a kind of a interesting coincidence. So Devadatta also climbed the swan because he had wounded the swan. And Indra comes in the court and he says that the swan belongs to the healing hands of Siddhartha, one who nurtures the life, to him the swan belongs. This I would call the Siddhartha Hamsa Nyaya. You apply this. When this dharma was attacked physically, conceptually, ideologically, who were there to defend it? Not the people who tell Hindutva and Hinduism are different. These the Hindutvites. They put even their lives. And they gave their lives, they sacrificed, they became Balidanis and they protected this. I come from Kanyakumari, okay, the land's end. There was a time when this Kanyakumari, which is a Shakti beat, there were attempts to rename it as Kanni Mary district. Okay. Who were there to fight for us that time? It is the Hindutvites. Not these people who are coming now and telling, like Sashi Tharoor, that Hinduism is different from Hindutva. No. Hindutva is the healing hands of Siddhartha. And the wounded swan is the Sanatana Dharma. That is the relation.
But nowhere you mentioned about Sanatana Dharma. You never tried to bring that as part of your core discussion.
Actually,
discussions of the Sanatana Dharma, as you mentioned now. Sir.
Right. I have mentioned Sanatana Dharma in Uttarpara speech of Sri Aravindan, the first chapter itself. I have mentioned Sanatana Dharma. Okay. Sanatana Dharma is Hindutva. Sanatana Dharma is Hindu Dharma. But what is Sanatana Dharma? Unfortunately, when Arya Samaj was doing all these reforms, social reforms very strongly, the socially stagnant orthodoxy, they tried to appropriate the term Sanatana Dharma. So it has gained a kind of a negative perception among people. And persons like Sri Aravindan and Mahatma Gandhi, poles apart otherwise, they both claimed that Sanatana Dharma has a larger context. So, in the context of temple entry movement, Mahatma Gandhi told that I am a proud Sanatani Hindu. So, the Sanatana Dharma has very much been there in the book.
The thought is that when you say the idea of Hindutva, then why not it can't be the idea of Sanatana Dharma? What is that hesitation that probably the people who are in the part of the discourse, that maybe they're, you know, like pushing them back to the using the word Sanatana Dharma?
I will.
Because if you consider the Abrahamic religion, so in that sense they are very much pro while using the word religion.
Okay. Now, talking about Abrahamic religions, I have never used the term Abrahamic religions in my book. Okay. The reason is because the term Abrahamic religion, actually, we have to make a very clear distinction here, and it is very relevant to the other question that you asked. There are two types of religion: monotheistic religions and monopolistic religions. A monotheistic religion says that there is one God, and we worship that God. With that, the matter ends there. Monopolistic religions, they say that there is one God, and that one God that we worship is the true God, and all other gods are false. So, monopolistic religions and monotheistic religions are different. A very important part of Abrahamic religions, Judaism, comes under monotheistic religion, not monopolistic religion. And hence the word using of the term Abrahamic can provide some kind of an anti-Semitic tinge to the narrative that we are building. So I have avoided the term Abrahamic. Now coming to Sanatana Dharma part, here my guide is Veer Savarkar. And Veer Savarkar says very clearly why he doesn't want to use that particular term, because the way it is being understood, as belonging to only the Vedic Dharma in a very narrow way. In fact, entire Hindutva is predicated upon the Vedic vision of reality, no doubt about it. And this Vedic vision of reality goes beyond the text of Vedas themselves. And it encompasses everything, including the tribal religions. Okay, so we have here a Hindu family of religions. And so I haven't used the term Sanatana Dharma here.
Okay. Sir,
Or I have reduced the use of the term Sanatana Dharma
okay.
here.
So there are four basic terms that currently in what we are in this process of discussion. A, Hinduism, Hindutva, Sanatana Dharma. 4, which is universal set according to you here?
Hindutva.
Why?
As I said, because Hindutva also carries with it the core values of Hindu Dharma. I think it was in 2009, if I am right. Newsweek came with a cover story called "We Are All Hindus Now," right? Because most of Americans, they were saying that salvation is possible outside their own churches if you live a good life. Okay. This is Lisa Miller identifies as a core Hindu value. So a process has to be there to take these Hindu values. That process is Hindutva. And it is through the process, because when you give the label Hindu to a person who is outside India, then it becomes a kind of narrowing him down. But if you are telling that he has embraced the process of Hindutva, I will give another one solid example perhaps here. You take the Australian Aborigines. Australian Aborigines have this sacred place called Uluru Mountains, where they go and they have this concept of dream time. They go do the rituals. A Hindu can go there, and he can, along with the Australian Aborigine, go before it. With the same respect he has for Kailash mountain, he can go before that mountain. What he does there? He does not convert that into a Hindu place. Rather, his Hinduness, his Hindutva, his Hinduness validates the spiritual tradition of the Australian Aborigine. It validates the spiritual traditions of Native Americans. It validates the spiritual traditions of African native religions that have been suppressed till date. Okay? So this is the Hindu-ness that is happening. He is not converting anybody, he is validating, and that is a process. Hence Hindutva is a very important, and I think it is the most appropriate term that we have to use.
So by saying that, are you trying to, like, probably in my thing that it looks like you are validating the people who are giving this statement today. I'm a Hindu, but not a Hindutva person.
The people who are giving this, as I said, again we are coming to this, the people who said Hindu, I am not a Hindutva, then the natural question that you have to ask is, so what you have done as a Hindu to protect the theodiversity? Right? Anything that has been done to protect the theodiversity of the planet, not leave alone this nation, of the planet, naturally will be a Hindutva process. And if he or she has done that, then he or she will realize that this is Hindutva. If she or he hasn't done that, calling that person Hindu is only using the label and being a hypocrite.
So you mentioned about the greater common good of all, the living on this earth. So in that sense, the idea of the Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. The second one in this discussion that you have mentioned about the idea of nation building, the life, the process. So what is the similarities between these two ideas?
Well,
is the nation state is the modern idea of the nation state, or the nation state is beyond, much beyond that?
India is a Rashtra, and Rashtra is an organic. Again, I will come to Savarkar. Savarkar said that we are no contract nation, we are an organic national being. Okay, I think that defines it, that we are a Rashtra, and we are a very unique Rashtra in the sense that you take, for example, I will give again an example. Sri Lalita Sahasranama, Mada Sri Maharaj, Srimat Simhasaneswari. So this Simhasaneswari, I was trying to write an article on this, and I wanted to find what is the oldest image of a goddess sitting on a Simhasana. You find that actually not in India, you find that in Turkey. Okay, goddess sitting on Simhasana. This goddess worship was once universal. Today, you find the goddess worship only in India in all its diversity. Okay, and today the goddess worship is very much needed if you want to protect the planet itself from the ecological disasters. And hence, this nation, preserving this nation is a blessing to entire humanity. And the nation state processes that we are seeing today, they are very important for the good of entire humanity. India lives not for herself but for the entire planet, and that is what it means by this. Okay, so this nation state building is very important. In that, what is very important is that, and that was the fallacy of Nehruvianism, the delusional fallacy of Nehruvianism, it separated the national being from the cold machinery of the state. So the mission, the state mission and the national organism, they were separated. And that was responsible for most of the problems that we are facing at the secular level or at the spiritual level of the nation. So the integration of the state and the nation, the same wavelength, that is important for India, and that is what Hindutva is doing. And if India is strong and healthy, then it is a blessing for the entire planet.
Okay, that's a great answer. So continuing the matter, that is, when we say that we will borrow, we will try to create a planet for everybody's good, but in that process we will also come under the influence of the others. May it be like the discussions with the Christians, with Muslims, with other communities. So how do they and their ideas fit in, or they part away from it?
See, there is a chapter, and I think that is one of the largest chapter, called Samanvaya. Okay, the word Samanvaya is an important aspect of Indian civilization, and it was Swami Ranganathan, the Maharaj of Sri Ramakrishna Mission, who brought it up. Samanvaya is an important civilizational process. On the other hand, you have something called dialectics that every Marxist wants to talk about. So dialectics is a mechanistic process, whereas Samanvaya is an organic process. When the Islamist invasions happened, we resisted. Okay, so according to the core Islamist theology, the only option that is left for a kafir who particularly worships idols was to be killed or to get converted. But here, because of the continuous resistance of Hindus, remember this, not because of the large-heartedness of the continuous resistance of Hindus, it transformed the Islamist psyche. So they had to accept Hindus as people of the book. So this shows how Hindutva operates. Okay. Then at a particular point comes, you take the case of Akbar. Akbar was an Islamist emperor. And this is again very interesting. And after he has gone through the battles and everything, he has a transformational change. None other than Sitaram Goyal's Voice of India book records this. So this is not an Agrarian statement. He gets transformed and then he makes a statement that when I was in darkness, I have compelled people to get converted to Islam. Now those who are converted like that, they can return back to their ancestral religion. Okay. Now you have to understand Islamic theology to understand the importance of this particular statement. Because according to Islamist theology, before Islam there was the age of ignorance. And coming to Islam is coming from the age of ignorance. Akbar reverses this in his Akbarnama. He says that when I was ignorant, I compelled people to get converted to Islam. Then came back. Then comes Tarashiko. Tarashiko is a very interesting case because according to this Puritan Islamist theology, Quran is the entire essence of revelations. And it is the complete revelation. You don't need another book to understand Islam. With Islam you can understand, with Quran you can understand other books. You don't need another book to understand Quran. Tarashiko rejects this. He says that Upanishads are the final revelations. He says that if you want to understand the Quran in a proper sense, you have to use Upanishads. But Upanishads by themselves, they are complete book. You don't need Quran to understand Upanishads. Now that is what makes him an apostate. And it was on the charges of being an apostate that he was killed. So here you see the process of Samanvaya slowly and steadily working. And that does not mean you get complacent. You start listening to anything that comes in the name of Sufi music. There are a different type of Sufis. There are Vedantic Sufis and there are Ijadist Sufis. Ijadist Sufis are people who use Sufism as a front for conversion, even forceful conversion. Then there are Vedantic Sufis, I mean the term is an oxymoron. They are Vedantic people who were born Muslims but they became Vedantics. Okay? Like Ibrahim Raskan, whose name is every day recited in RSS Egatmata Stotra. Okay. So this is how this Samanvaya operates. In the case of Christianity, okay, I will give an example that most probably the name may be very familiar in this Konkan region. There was this Catholic priest called Anthony de Mella. So Anthony de Mella was very much influenced by Hindus, accepted that truth can be attained through different paths. And his books were immensely famous. The Catholic Church prohibited use of his books. So here you see the tension of how Hinduism actually, Hindutva transforms other religion slowly and steadily. The point is you have to be strong. And it is interesting again to tell that the first book on RSS was written by a Catholic priest. Book in English was written by Catholic priest Anthony Eliavetum in 1951, and he was the person who coined the term pseudo-secularism. So this is a very complicated process, a civilizational process, and all it needs is for Hindus to be strong and united in their goal and vision for this to happen.
Well, Aravind, as I have already mentioned the name of the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, and also very interestingly, you have a chapter on this Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, and he also discusses one chapter which is beyond or before the entry of the Sangha, and who all tried and worked for the Hindutva. Well, hence you have mentioned, you also discuss a very interesting part, that is intellectualism versus activism. Do you still think that RSS restricted itself to only the activism rather than taking it to the level of intellectualism?
Actually, there is a big misconception. I call it Goyal-Elst syndrome. Okay, because many people these days read a book of Sitaram Goyal and a few essays of Coentrad-Elst, and then they think that okay, we can criticize RSS. And there is this general misconception even among many people who call themselves Hindutva that the RSS is a kind of a physical culture. They are automatons without brain. Think about this. You take the entire political thought evolution of India after Mahatma Gandhi, very original Indian rooted thinkers. Who were they? Pandit Deendayal Upadhyaya and Dattopant Thengadi. And they formulated a thought, a system that is rooted in India at the same time that was facing the challenges of the West. The challenges that have been unleashed here in the form of Marxism. People who are millennials, they won't be knowing what it means to grow in India 70s and 80s, where Marxism is considered as the panacea for all things, and the Mecca was Moscow. At such a situation, I still remember Dattopant Thengadiji's lecture on Marxism on Marxist Anvil. He told that I will use the framework of Marxism to deconstruct Marxism, and he did a brilliant job of it. And Dattopant Thengadi brought a very new chapter for this trade union movement, which is not Marxist, which is not capitalist. These are people who were sleeping in railway stations in cold winter nights, traveling all through India, and they were working also. They were not people who were sitting in AC rooms. It is because of these people were sleeping in the railway platforms of unknown stations in cold winter nights that we are sitting today and we are talking. So this dichotomy between intellectualism and activism is itself false. Sangh has created a strong intellectual activist phenomenon that is almost unknown to the world, very unique to India. We take these things for granted, like the fish in the ocean. If you look at it, you will understand. Today we have a lot of thought, a lot of this talk about rewriting Indian history, bringing out the names of people, old people who have been forgotten, etc., etc. But think about this. If you meet a Punjabi person, and that Punjabi person, a Punjabi boy, if that Punjabi boy knows the name of Thiruvalluvar, if that Punjabi boy knows the name of Nayanmars, Alvars and Rajendra Chola, if you meet a person from Tamil Nadu, and if that Tamil Nadu person knows the name of Narayana Guru and knows the name of Karavela and Yasodharma, you can be 100% sure that both these people, both this boy from Punjab and Tamil Nadu, they have been RSS people who have been reciting Ekatmata Stotra every morning. Right? So they have created this narrative. They have put it there. It is for you to develop. Who failed the Sangh are the people who are called themselves intellectuals and who didn't go to the Shagas. Go to the Shaga, look for yourself what is happening, then you will understand how to integrate your intellectualism with the ground activism, which is very important. And that is, I think, the answer.
Yeah. Before I open the discussion, just my last question to you on this matter is that, but of course, without discussing that, any debate or any discussion on Hindutva won't be completed. That is the ideas of Ambedkar. So, as you mentioned about the millennials' ignorance towards all these kind of thinkers, that do you really see the influences of Ambedkar amongst the millennials? If so, how is it accommodating, or how his views can still be accommodating within the ideas of the broader Hindutva framework, as you mentioned it as a universal set?
Okay. I consider Baba Saheb Ambedkar always as the Bodhisattva. Okay. I always call him respectfully Bodhisattva Ambedkar. And often I get criticized for that. I don't mind that. Because I first heard the name of Baba Saheb Ambedkar not in any of my textbooks, but in Egatmata Stotra, and then from a book published by Rashtrotan Parishad. and Baba Sahib Ambedkar. And he was a nationalist, very clearly. He loved this nation. But later, when you read books like the riddles, you find that why he is so harsh on us. There is another dimension to this harshness. That is how our traditionalist so-called dharmacharyas have behaved in 1920s and 1930s. When such a basic things like the right of the scheduled communities to walk in the public roads, such take water from the public well, such fundamental rights, the way our dharmacharyas behaved, well, to put it very charitably, was not very dharmic. And the harsh words of Dr. Ambedkar you have to see as a response to that. See, I was not a very brilliant student. I used to get very low marks, and my father used to call me and used to shout at me telling that you are only fit to go and rear buffaloes. Okay. He was shouting at me like that. I know that he was doing it for my own good. He didn't mean that. The same way you have to take the words of Dr. Ambedkar that are harsh on Hindu Dharma, because it is in these riddles of Hinduism. He has put another one very important passage, and that passage, very interestingly, is never quoted by the so-called Ambedkarites. He says that democracy is not just a political system, but it is a way of life. And if it is a way of life, then it should have a spiritual basis. He says, what is that spiritual basis? And then he tells, the Upanishad Mahavakyas are the spiritual basis of democracy. And then he says, that is why it was in India that democracy came long before it came in Greek. So when Narendra Modi says that India is the mother of democracy, he is actually relating himself to Bodhisattva Ambedkar. Okay? And he was the person who very clearly stated that not a drop of Indus water would be given to Pakistan unless Pakistan recognizes the sovereignty of India. He was the person who first warned Nehru against 1950s. He warned Nehru against using his Panchashila principles with respect to China. And you know that Dr. Ambedkar loved Buddhism so much. Nevertheless, he put it in writing that Panchashila, being a Buddhist doctrine, it is a doctrine for spirituality. You don't use it for foreign policies. That is Dr. Ambedkar. And you had to read actually Dhananjay Kir's book on Dr. Ambedkar. You have to read Manuvad and RSS by Sri Ramesh Padanke. Then we would understand what is Dr. Ambedkar. Okay, the holistic Dr. Ambedkar. Unfortunately, most people read that half-baked book on Dr. Ambedkar, Worshipping the False Gods, which contains a lot of data, but all are distorted data taken out of context. That is the problem.
Okay, now the house is open for the discussion. So, any questions from the audience? Please introduce and then ask the question.
I am Vishweshwar Bhatt Bangaradka. I represent BJP. You spoke about the concept of nation state. Do you still think that India is a nation state? If your answer is positive, in what way it is different from the concept of nation state that the Europeans believe?
Okay. India is a Rashtra, as I said, and Rashtra is more than a nation state. It also subsumes a nation state. And how is it different from the European or Western nation states? Well, the European nation states are always built on this one blood, one language, and one nation, mostly. And it is in America you have this melting pot concept. Even there it is subsumed to the white Protestant identity. In the case of India, the concept of nation itself is based on, as I said, theodiversity, Egam Sad Vibra Bhagavata Vadanti, and it is also built on the divine feminine, and I am coming to that, yes, exactly. So, this is the basis of the nation, okay? This is the basis of nation. And The state has its own mechanical aspects. Those mechanical aspects have to be harmonized with the nation. That is what Gandhiji wanted when he said that Swarajya is a Vedic concept, a sacred term, a Vedic term. And he wanted the nation state to be built in those lines. Unfortunately, during the Nehruvian time, there has been a diversion, and now we are doing the path correction. So the point is, we have been a nation state, and we have done some deviation, and we are doing the course correction. That is how I see it. Actually, I have explained this in the book. The nation in India is a process of consciousness. It is an expansion of consciousness, and it is an evolution of a deeper process. I can say that it is more Sri Arvindonian than anything. And I believe that in the due course, India will become Akhanda Bharat, not in terms of, and I have explained it very clearly in the books, and it will become Akhanda Bharat, a Visala Bharat, and it will become Viswa Bharat. Okay? In that time, Pakistan or Afghanistan, they will find their core roots. And I have quoted actually a particular Pakistani author who sees Pakistan itself as a land of Shiva. Okay? So, these things are there, already there. There was this famous PM Syed who was actually interacting with K.R. Malkani a lot, and they talked about how Sindhu can again be reclaimed culturally. The point is, India has to be the receptacle, it is the basis, it is the bud from which we do this expansion.
Okay, next question.
Namaskara, Chandrasekhar. We are discussing on the word Hindutva. Can you please throw some light on the word Hindu? Because what we understand in generally, the Hindu is a term given by foreigners to by geo-identical or geological identical of a particular place of a country, and actually the word is more of Bharat or Sanatan, and any of our ancient texts, nowhere the Hindu word is there. I read recently there are some Puranic statements are given, but it more of looking, it is being inserted intentionally to defend Hindu word. Is it actually we are too liberal to accept the Hindu which is being given by an outsider rather than using our own evolved identity of Bharat or Sanatan? Can you please put your thoughts on it? Thank you.
Actually, the first chapter deals purely with this, the evolution of the word Hindu. There was this famous Dravidianologist called Dr. Airavada Mahadeva. Okay. He, an IAS officer, was studying the Harappan seals and everything. You know the famous unicorn seal, right? You remember the unicorn seal in Harappan. And before that, there is a filter-like object. So he wanted to understand what it was. Interestingly, he went to Rigveda, and he found that the Soma filter is represented by that particular seal, and those small droplets that you can see actually, they are called Hindu. Okay? And Hindu is also synonymous to Soma in Rigveda. Keep this at one side. In the famous Nadi Sukta of Rigveda, the word Susoma, the name Susoma, is used for one of the branches of Sindhu. So here you have, there are two dots, connected dots. One is the word Hindu and another is the word Susoma, which relates to Sindhu, right? So here you have already a sacred geography as well as a spiritual connection here, okay, to the word Hindu, not Hindu still. And again, it will take a lot of time to get into that. What I argue in the book is that there was a schism between the Zoroastrians and the Vedic culture. the Zoroastrians were the original monotheistic religious people. They believed that there is this god called Ahriman, and there was this Ahura Mazda. Ahriman is the Satan or the bad god. Ahura Mazda was the good god. They had this divide. They moved away from India, and then there were a lot of conflicts. And the very first inscription that talks about the word Hindu, it tells about the destruction of the temples of the Devas and installation of Ahura Mazda. Okay. So here you have the word Hindu or Hindu associated with a particular spiritual tradition. And already you have in Rig Veda the Hindu and Soma getting associated, and we always say that the Sindhu became Hindu. But in between you have the word Hindu also, which very clearly states that all these words are connected to not only a sacred geography, but also to a spiritual tradition. Come to the historic times, when Huan Song was visiting here, like it was some 1300 years ago. And he tells that this land entirely, he had visited up to the south, to the Pallava kingdom. And he says, this land entirely is called Hindu. And then he gives the meaning for that. He says, interestingly, he says, in the Chinese language, Hindu means moon, because this land is a spiritual moon at the time of darkness for the entire world, because of the rishis and the Siddha Purushas and the Bodhisattvas. Because of that, this land is called Hindu. And then you see the word appearing again, when during the Vijayanagara Empire were giving the resistance, it is called Induraya, right? So this term has always been there with us. It was not given to us by the people outside. It represented both the sacred geography of the land and also the spiritual traditions. And what is this spiritual traditions? It is the spiritual tradition that accepts diversity of divinity. And the first schism between Hindus and the non-Hindus, the Parsis, is because of, or the Zoroastrians, is because of the inability of the Zoroastrians to accept the diversity of divinity. So that also forms the core civilizational value. So the word Hindu is perfectly correct for us. I hope that answers the question.
Okay. Thank you one and all. Because yeah, one last question probably we can accommodate to. Yeah.
Namaste. My question is Neo-Christianity a threat to Hindutva? Because we have heard about Padmapani, Pinakapani, Vajrapani, Shankapani, different names from Hindu mythology or Buddhism. But what happening in Kerala and other parts of India, the Christians and churches slowly are looking like Hindu temples. They have started Puram festivals, and Christ, he almost holding Pinaka of Shiva, and Shank or other, he is almost looking like a Vishnu for that matter. Is this threat to Hindutva or Hinduism? That's my question.
Okay. How much time we have actually?
So actually you can answer, but after that also we have a concept called Hartekate, that informal questions or the interaction can
I
continue.
will just tell you one thing. 5 minutes I will
Yes,
take
sir.
it. Okay.
Is that audio?
Here
2 minutes.
I have given 3 models of negative interaction of Christianity with Hindu Dharma. And one of those negative interactions is the appropriation of cultural symbols and spiritual symbols. So there is this famous Sachidananda ashram near Kaveri in Tamil Nadu. So though it is called Sachidananda ashram in the title, in the registry of monasteries in the Vatican, it is actually Benedictine monastery. And many of those people there, they have been trying to do this cultural appropriation. I will give an example of one person, Henry Lee Sachs. So Henry Lee Sachs comes here and he assumes the name Abhishtikananda, Swami Abhishtikananda. And he goes to each and every Hindu temple and he studies the spiritual phenomena. Okay. He even goes to Ramanashrama, he goes to the Virubhasha cave, and then what he does is he always takes bread and wine and he will go inside that particular temple and cave, and then when nobody is watching, he would do a holy communion only with himself. he will do the Holy Communion ritual, and he would tell that I am claiming this place for Christ. Okay. So he used to do all this. Then he even had a project called Catholic Ramana, where he wanted a boy to be groomed similar to Ramana, so that instead of Ramana, many foreigners would be attracted to this boy. That project collapsed. And one day he had a heart attack near Rudraprayag. And there also he had gone to a Shiva temple and he had done this bread wine business. He had a heart attack, he fell down. And he was in the saffron robes, and people came, they saved his life and everything. That heart attack actually transformed him. And he then started writing that all this Namarupa Peda is what the church has imposed on me. The reality exists outside this. And then he became very unpopular with the Christian missionaries. Okay. So these appropriations are always happening. Always happen. We have to guard against this. And they also create this false historical narrative that St. Thomas came here and it was the Christianity that became distorted into Hinduism. We have to be careful of all this. And we have to work on the Samanvaya. Okay. So is appropriation a threat? It is a threat. And do we have to take action? Yes, we have to take action. Who has to take action? The Hindu Sampradaya-charyas, they have to come and take action. We have the Sangadana-charyas. The Sampradacharyas have to become Sangadana-charyas. And they have to come and take the action. Unfortunately, that is not happening. We have to work on that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you Aravindan for that wonderful discussion on the Hindutva, and with that we bring the end of the first session in the 5th edition of the Mangalore Lit Fest. Thank you audience for being a wonderful and patient hearing, and also thank Aravindan for this discussions and coming to Mangalore
Thank you
again.
so much
So
for
you're
this
part of this since
wonderful
the first
event.
festival.
Thank
So
you.
thank you very much. We have a very unique concept this time that's called Haratekate. That's an informal discussion can continue with the authors and artists that are present here. So that is in the next hall that can be continued even for next 2 days. Okay. We are only ending the session, but discussion can continue. It's the beginning of the discussion. Thank you one and all.
Thank you, Shri Aravind ji, for broadening our perspective on Hindutva. And thank you, Shreeraj Kulkarni, Shreeraj Gudi sir, for conducting this session.